Welcome to Fantasy University, and congratulations on admission to the one school that literally everyone can get in. That's right, we welcome beginners, intermediate, and advanced fantasy players here on campus, so no matter your skill level, or I suppose lack thereof, we want to help you learn everything from the basics on how to win your league, and of course, making football season exponentially more fun in the process. Best of all, while the price for higher education is skyrocketing, Fantasy U is absolutely 100% free. Our top-notch analysts here at Yahoo, and I guess me, will play the role of professors as we teach you the ins and outs of fantasy through a series of classes in the form of articles, videos, and more. Now, let's get to work on the most fun you're ever going to have in school. So what is fantasy football? Fantasy football is a 17-week game where you draft a team and try to outscore your opponents on a weekly basis en route to winning that elusive fantasy championship. Oh, yeah. You're going to take down all your league mates in a playoff-style format to get there, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. There are many different formats and settings in fantasy football, but for most of you out there, you're going to be drafting quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and even kickers and defenses. It is going to get absolutely wild out there. The draft is pretty much the most fun part of fantasy football. When you select players, the entire league gets together, you bring all these guys onto your roster, but the job doesn't end there. Like I mentioned, you're going to match up with another team in your league every week in a head-to-head format, and whoever scores the most points by setting the best lineup is going to win that given week. Throughout the course of the season, you'll have to, when you have the chance, and you're going to want to take that chance, make changes to your team. You can do this by making trades with other players in the league, or using the waiver wire to add players to your roster. That's going to mean you're also going to need to drop players from your team as well. But what is fantasy football and what is it about? It's a game about a game. It's supposed to be fun. It's a way to get an extra layer of investment in football, which in and of itself is an engrossing sport to follow and enjoyable to watch. Fantasy football just adds that extra layer of intrigue to the sport and invites you to dive deeper into the game a level or two than you maybe otherwise would have. You get to compete against people you like, such as your friends or family, and even sometimes you get to thump some folks you don't like. This should be an enjoyable experience for you. Don't let the frustrating parts of the game get to you and make you act like a lunatic on the internet. That's not what fantasy football is about. Enjoy the highs and ride through the irritating lows. That is my best piece of advice to you this year. These are the top 10 fantasy terms you need to know. Number 1, ADP, average draft position. ADP refers to where fantasy players have been selecting a specific NFL player on average during draft season. Pretty self-intuitive. For example, Christian McCaffrey's ADP is 1.01, as in he has been the first player taken in the first rounds of drafts on average. Number 2, ceiling, a term used to describe kind of like the high range of a player's outcomes. A player who reaches their ceiling is a player who has surpassed their average performance expectations. Yeah! Number 3, floor. This is a term we use to describe the starting range of a player's performance outcomes. When we say like, oh, this guy, the floor is wide receiver 24, that's kind of the bare minimum of his expectations, but he could go even higher than that. Number 4, mock draft. A mock draft is simply just a fake draft that people go through to kind of understand how drafts play out, their expectations. A mock draft is basically just your practice draft before the real thing, before the season starts. Number 5, hiccup. This is when a fantasy manager adds a player off the waiver wire and or free agent pool. They take them from the free agents and they add them to their roster. You're going to need to make pickups every week, so this is an important term to know. Number 6, projections. Projections are used to guess what a player's stat line will be. It's not an exact approximation, but it helps you get in the ballpark. Us analysts will use historical player data and team data to put together well-informed projections for a player on a season or weekly basis. Number 7, stashing. Stashing refers to when a fantasy manager adds a player to their active roster, but puts them on the bench. You're not trying to use this player right away, but you might be saving them for a specific point in the season. Now we're going to reach the nebulous terms people weirdly fight about in our fantasy space here for the final 3, starting with 8, sleeper. Sleeper is just a phrase used to describe kind of a little known or maybe underappreciated player who can well outkick their season expectations, whether it's skill related, opportunity, situation, whatever. Number 9 is a breakout. This is a moniker given to a player who is going to reach a new previously uncharted, unusually expected level of positive performance. Basically, this is someone that is just going to take their game to a new heights. Number 10 is a bust. This is a moniker given to a player or team who falls well short of season expectations. Normally, this is a player who's going very early in your drafts that you might want to avoid because there are some warning signs that they might not work out. Let's talk about how to draft a fantasy football team. One time of the year, you and all of your league mates are going to get together in the Yahoo draft room, and the entire player pool is going to be available to you. You're going to have your starters and you're going to have your bench players. In the first round, you want to select some of the best players. For me, I like to target running backs or wide receivers there that are going to be heavily involved in their team offenses. Highly targeted receivers, workhorse running backs. Those are your first round picks. We want to come away from the draft with the strongest team that has areas of clear strengths and not too many areas of weaknesses. Multiple times during the draft, things are not going to go as planned. That's my biggest piece of advice to you about drafting is be flexible. Be ready to adjust. You're going to go in with this idea of, I'm going to have this strategy or that strategy or whatever. These are the players I want to target. And somebody's going to get the jump on you. Don't panic. Remain calm. And just remember, this is your time to acquire as much talent as possible. And then the real fun begins when the season kicks off. So how does fantasy scoring work? In fantasy football, you get points for what happens on the field. It's really all based around statistics. Every league is going to score differently, but this is just, again, an example based on standard operating procedures. A touchdown in the NFL is worth 6 points. The player who catches or runs in that touchdown is also awarded 6 points for your fantasy team. Your running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends are also awarded points for yardage, such as you get 1 point for every 10 yards gained rushing or receiving. So again, this is a statistics-based game. That's why it's important for you to focus on opportunity. Players who touch the ball most in the run game, or the players who get the ball thrown to them most in the passing game, are going to have the opportunity to get those statistics that you need to score for your fantasy team. And then at the end of each given week, all of the players that you started and their points will be measured against whoever you started them against. And if you have more points, you win. Winning. And that's the goal of this thing. Yeah, it's to have fun, but it's also to win. And I think now you understand a little more about how fantasy scoring works. Let's talk through how to make transactions in your fantasy league. That pretty little team that you drafted at the beginning of the year, I hate to break it to you, but chaos is going to hit that team. Okay? It's not all going to work out. Somebody's going to get hurt.
Oh no.
That's just the unfortunate reality of the game. Also, that sleeper that you loved, they're not going to pan out. So you're going to want to make changes to that team that you drafted, even if you loved it so much. To add players on a weekly basis, you're going to go to that players tab in Yahoo, and you're going to just look through the available free agents. You're going to sort by previous points. You're going to read all the great analysis we have here on players who are seeing their opportunity rise, seeing their snap share rise, seeing their target share, their route participation. All of those metrics go up. You're going to want to try to add those players to your roster, and extra points to you if you can do it before it's obvious, and certainly before all your league mates catch up to you. There's also trading. You're going to want to go to other teams in your league and see where they're weak. Go to the league tab, pop in those other teams, see where insert other team here is weak. Maybe they need a receiver. You've got a lot of extra receivers, but you don't quite have that running back. Maybe they're flush with running backs. You can propose a trade to them and then begin the negotiating process. If they don't like the first trade, don't be afraid to offer up another one. Drafting is totally important. No question about it. It's the most fun part of fantasy, in my opinion. But you're really going to make your team stand out and take it to the next level by adding players astutely off the waiver wire and making some fair trades in your league.
Let's talk about 3 popular fantasy football draft strategies, some of which you may have been employing for years without knowing that they'd actually been named. Nothing is ever really new in fantasy football. We'll start with zero RB. This is an approach that isn't for everyone because it is going to leave you feeling uncomfortable with your post-draft roster. The basic idea here is that in recognition of higher injury rates at running back, you are going to avoid that spot entirely in the early rounds. You're going to open your draft with 5 receivers and a tight end, then maybe take a QB, and then a few more receivers. Don't take running backs until the mid and late rounds, but then you draft a bunch of them. Take flyers on backs who might find their way to fantasy relevance, but they won't have it in opening week. Executed properly, zero RB gives you real dominance and depth at receiver and possibly at tight end. It also gives you a little bit of work to do at running back, so you need to be aggressive on the wire. When all those first and second round running backs begin to get hurt, though, all those managers are going to feel kind of lousy about their backfields, at least as bad as you do, except that their receivers won't be nearly as good as yours. So zero RB generally works a little bit better in full PPR, but it's playable anywhere. The opposite approach is something called robust RB, which is how our grandparents used to draft back in the 1970s. I can't recommend it to you exactly, but you will feel good about your backfield in the first month or so of the season before those guys start to get hurt. And a third approach is a bit of a hybrid of the two things called hero RB, in which you draft a single upper tier running back and then you focus your attention elsewhere. This is a great approach for people who understand that zero RB is probably a winning strategy, but they're just too cowardly to actually do it. If you just can't stand the idea of having an imbalanced roster on draft day, hero RB is probably your best path. Here's the thing about player rankings, you guys. They are simply one tool of many that are available to you when you draft a team or build a lineup. They are not actually the answer key to the NFL season or to any given week. Hate to break that to those of you who've been using them for many years, but it's true. As a fantasy analyst, it is my task to somehow consider the full range of possible outcomes for a player, from worst case scenario to best case, and then decide what's most likely for them, and then distill all of that into an inappropriately specific rank. QB 8, wide receiver 16, tight end 4, etc. Ranks are honestly just a very blunt tool. For me, a player rank is something like a 50th percentile outcome for that player. But sometimes you're going to find yourself facing a powerhouse lineup and you really need to start the guy with the highest 90th percentile outcome. Or at other times, maybe all you care about is finding the player with the highest floor in a given week. So again, ranks are just one tool. They are not suitable to all situations. Roster decisions require context. This is why we produce all that other content for you. If you focus strictly and exclusively on our rankings, you'll never get the full story. One of the most important traits of the winningest fantasy football managers is that they can accept that our game is going to have some blank spaces, things that cannot be known on draft day. Some of you simply cannot operate this way. You need to feel as if you can know what's around every corner, as if we're playing a highly predictable game. Instead, we're actually playing a game that is ruled by chaos, by mayhem and carnage. A game in which injuries are the only thing that we can ever really bank on. All of the over-planners get tripped up in a game like this. We need short time horizons in fantasy football. Make plans for this week, maybe for this month, but you cannot make January plans in September and October. The game simply won't accommodate it. Fantasy experts will occasionally sound like con artists, but we are truly selling you some snake oil when we start talking strength of schedules several months in advance. The game always defies that sort of planning. It's what makes this thing so entertaining. You need to react throughout the season as the league constantly reinvents itself. If you are the person looking at late season schedule strength in August, then you might be the sucker in the room. The best managers are the ones who get comfortable with uncertainty, and they are the quickest to react to new info.